So let's talk about making time to do the shit jobs in your business. I was reminded of this doing something completely different on the farm, and it reminded me of this particular lesson, and I wanted to share this with you because I think it's valuable and it plays out in so many areas for us business owners. So let me give you a little bit of background. So on the farm we have a couple of water tanks, and although we are in the wet tropics and there is a lot of rain, there are still periods where there is drought. So we have two water tanks. We've got one for the house and we've got another backup that we primarily use for the animals. Now, the second tank was never used by the previous owners, and when we moved here, we didn't have a regulation valve in that tank. So basically it was being filled up manually, and you have to remember to do it. So I went to the water shop, I got a regulation valve, which is basically like a sensor, a manual sensor. When it gets to a certain level, it opens the valve, and then once it fills to a certain level, it closes the valve. It's very rudimentary. It utilizes a kind of a float that closes it, and it uses a weight that opens it depending on when the tank is low enough for that to be triggered. Worked perfectly for the first like 12 to 18 months we were here, and basically about 18 months ago it stopped working. Basically the valve would turn on but it would not turn off, and I'm like, oh no, we've got too much water pressure. I must have blown the valve that was inside. I've got to remember to take it off, got to remember to fix it. And for basically 18 months, I have had to fill up that water tank manually. And a couple of times we've let it run completely low, and there've been kind of moments of panic. Luckily, there hasn't been any drought. We've actually had a lot of rain, so it's been filled up very, very quickly. Now, I've been procrastinating about going and doing this thing and fixing it. It's a quick job, right? And I realized that there was a couple of issues. Procrastination, or falling short of the action threshold, which is covered in a book called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, one of my favorite books of all time. It's actually been life-changing for me as somebody with ADHD, because this is something that happens to me all of the time. Now, in order for you to do something, there are basically two considerations that need to be had. The first consideration is your perceived difficulty of a particular task. So if you see something as being hard, it is obviously going to be easier for you to procrastinate than if you see that as being something easy to do. The second consideration is your motivation to do something. So is it something that highly motivates you, or something that doesn't motivate you? And this is all well and good, but there also needs to be a trigger for the thought to take place in the first place, right? You need to have remembered and then be motivated by it, and then have a perceived difficulty, and then depending on the intersection of those two considerations, then you either pass an action threshold, meaning that you do the work, or you don't. You fall short and then you don't. The trigger is really important, because you either need to have the trigger to remember to do it in the first place, or that the trigger needs to be at an opportune time, right? That it's relevant. And for somebody with ADHD, I always remember to do things. My trigger exists at the complete wrong times. Usually when my head hits the pillow at night, or usually when I'm already in town and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to take the valve off and take it to the water shop and replace the valve. It's not easy to pursue this thing, and the blanket response to all of this is, well, I'm just procrastinating about it. I'm just not moving ahead with it. So today, 18 months on, I needed to go get some extra water pipe because we're having some water issues for our water system. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to the water shop. I remembered it was my trigger. I need to fix that valve. So I got up on the ladder. The ladder was already in place on the side of the water tank. I jumped up. It took me like 30 seconds to screw it off. I opened it, and then I immediately discovered what the issue was. There was leaves that were clogging up the valve, meaning that it could not shut even when it wanted to. And literally in another 30 seconds, I opened up the valve, I cleaned out the leaves, I reinstalled it. It works perfectly. I'd probably say end to end probably took me about 3 to 4 minutes, and the problem was completely solved. Now, it wasn't a life or death situation, guys. And to be frank, in business, the vast majority of situations are not life or death either. There are things that I know you watching this video that are immediately coming to mind for you that you have either not been triggered to do, so you've never even had a prompt to say, hey, I should do that, or you've been prompted at the completely wrong time, so you couldn't even do it at that point in time even if you wanted to. You haven't had the motivation to do something, because it's kind of boring, it's not exciting, it's not something that you enjoy, or you perceive it to be too difficult. And as a result of all of these factors, those tasks that are on a never-ending list of things to do continue to add up, and you continue to not do them. Now, how I've tried to solve this myself. Well, the first thing is that I try and create a 12-week plan. And in that 12-week plan, I have a very clear set of outcomes and projects that I want to finish. What I then do is each and every single week on a Monday, I do my weekly planner. And I basically look at my projects that I've got to complete for that particular quarter. I sit down and I go through and I say, okay, well, what are the tasks that I need to do this week to progress towards my 12-week plan, and make sure that I've diarized the time to do the boring stuff, right? And because I know that these things are necessary in order to help me achieve the particular projects that I've committed to for that quarter, because I've created the time to allow for the prompts to happen, and then I have diarized the time to do the boring tasks, then they get done. And I get them done in a far higher quantity than I ever have before. The important part is that I needed the prompt in the first place, and I needed to make sure that I had the space in order to go through and do the reps. And the interesting thing is that the vast majority of those projects and tasks that I needed to do were far easier than I actually thought that they were going to be, because I just set aside the time, right? Much like the water valve, it might only take 5, 10, 15 minutes. It might even take you an hour to get these things done. But once they're off your plate, you can then move on to the next thing. So I hope this is a valuable lesson. Hopefully you've come up with a list of things that you can go away and now complete. And I suspect that it's going to be far easier than you thought it was going to be. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.